And everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to NASCA's National Webinar Series. Today we're going to be working with Accenture, one of our research partners, to talk about innovating in a new era. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, we're excited to have you join us. As you're dialing in, please make sure that you rename yourself so that we can see who's with us today. Put your name and your state or your company if you don't already have that on your Zoom account, just so we can see who is here. Drop a quick note in chat to say hello to your colleagues and your friends as well. And we're going to get started talking a little bit about innovation, the role of a CAO, how it's adapted, changed, revised, really what the global health pandemic has done to the Chief Administrative Officer role in our states. We're thrilled today to have a great set of panelists with us to have a conversation around this. We still have a few folks dialing in, so we'll give them just a second to join us and get connected. But again, drop your information in chat, say hello. If you'd like to connect with others, drop your LinkedIn information there. We'd be glad to connect with you. We'd love for you to connect with NASCA across all of our social channels, so we have an opportunity to stay engaged. But again, welcome. Today's National Webinar Series is around innovating in a new era, exploring the role of a Chief Administrative Officer. I'm Pam Goins, the Executive Director here at NASCA, and we are so excited to have you with us here. We're going to talk today a little bit about some survey results that NASCA and one of our signature partners, Accenture, completed last fall, and really looking at the core of the pandemic, really where we had to transform, how states were shifting, pivoting, adapting, and really what we're seeing holding true for now and into the future. So we're excited to have you, and let's get started with today's activities. So Tammy, if you'll take us to our first slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're here with Accenture. This is one of our signature partner resources, and we do 2 signature events each year where we partner with one of our corporate private sector members to really delve into a topic of interest of our state chief administrators and teams. And so Accenture was gracious enough to work with NASCA around a survey last fall, talking to all the states and really just building out some of the responses from the pandemic. So we're excited today to share some of those results with you. As you'll see here that we had an opportunity to survey 32 states, the state chief administrative officer, and hear from them. So Tammy, let's go to our next slide, please. Before we get started, we want to hear from you. This is a great opportunity for our panelists and the NASCA team to hear from you, and let's kind of gauge what's happening in your own state. So let's bring up our first poll. These are very user-friendly. You have an opportunity to respond to this. So poll number 1. Currently, in your state or your company, what area is the biggest priority of innovation? Human capital, facilities management, information technology, real estate, or the digital delivery? What's happening in your own state? Where would you say your largest amount of time and your priority, your energy, your effort is going around this innovation? Human capital seems to be leading the way. IT is definitely something that is important, and we're hearing from our states as well. We'll give you just another second or two to respond to this. All right, Tammy, why don't you show us our results from the first poll? So human capital at 59%, not at all surprising. That certainly encompasses many, many things, from workforce development, alignment, DEI in the workforce, employee engagement and experience, etc. IT certainly very, very close to that. All right, let's pull up our second poll for today. So is your team assessing which changes that were adopted during COVID pandemic should become permanent and where you need to restore processes and procedures? So yes, we are in the advanced stages. We're pretty far down that path. Or yes, but we're probably more on the earlier beginning stages, or we have no formal decision-making processes to evaluate at this point. So again, thinking about your own team, your own office, department, agency, where are you looking as far as making some of those processes and changes permanent? So we'll give you just another few seconds to respond to this. All right, Tammy, let's see how the results are showing this afternoon. Pretty close. The greatest majority, over 80%, are saying yes, we're at some point in this conversation to assess the changes that need to be made. All right, one more, and then we'll get started with today's conversation. So our third poll today: would you consider the CAO's office at the core of driving innovation across the state enterprise? 4 options for you here. Yes, we're the driver, the convener, the facilitator of the innovation. Yes, we're somewhat at the core, but perhaps not the main leader. Yes, but more limited and mostly in our own agency. Or no, we're really not in the CAO's office, but looking to advance that role. So again, thinking about the chief's office, are you at the core of driving that innovation across the enterprise? So again, we'll give you just a few more seconds to respond and answer. All right, perfect. Tammy, let's see how that poll has resulted. Interesting here. Okay, 39% are saying somewhat, but we're not really the driver. Only 22% are saying yes, we're driving that innovation at the core. So we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today. It's a great indicator of where our states are and really very beneficial to our panelists as well. So let's move on then, Tammy, to introduce today's panelists. We are so excited to have 2 members of Accenture with us, and also 2 of our state members who are working day to day on these events. Let me introduce Alex Atwood, the Commissioner at the Department of Administration in Georgia, Shannon Ryan, an Administrator in Oregon, and then both Jenny Brody and Jamie Rogers with Accenture. We're thrilled to have all 4 of you with us here today. We look forward to your insights and your feedback, and just want to have an engaging conversation with everyone on the call today. So Jenny, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kick us off.
All right, well, thanks for that introduction, Pam. And I just want to start by saying we really want this discussion to be engaging. So we're going to stop, we're going to share some research, we're going to stop, we're going to hear from our great panelists, and then we'd like to turn it to you guys. So whether you're offering thoughts in the chat or coming off mute and joining the conversation, we really want it to be interactive. If we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we all felt change over this past couple of, 18 months now that we're at. And across both the private sector and the public sector, we're hearing that things are going to look pretty different going forward. The chief administrators were no different. 90% of the CIOs said that government and strategy operations are going to look very different. And as you also have seen and felt, many of your residents of your states have interacted with government in new and different ways. Some used unemployment for the first time, some worked with the state to schedule a COVID test or a vaccination. And you all were feeling pretty positive about these interactions. The majority of CAOs said that they felt the pandemic had a positive impact on the public's trust in state government. So within this context, we wanted to really think about how the CAO role had driven innovation and how it had changed throughout the pandemic. If you want to go to the next slide. So what we found is that, and what many of you also indicated, is that you were involved in innovation during the pandemic. 81% of the CAOs reported that we surveyed reported that their office had a role in initiating and driving innovation across state government. So a little bit higher than the numbers we saw today. But during a crisis, you know, everyone got all hands on deck, and it sounds like CIOs really stepped up to that role. And I'm sure that many of you felt this, and from talking to CIOs, we've heard a lot of this, but 72% said they were called to innovate outside of their typical domain. So many reported being called in to help with PPE, with medical supplies, with testing, and the organizational ability and capacity of the CIO's office was really showcased throughout the pandemic. If we go to the next slide. Along with this, we found that CIOs piloted a lot more projects during 2020. And we're seeing this, you know, across sectors as well. The private sector is saying they also piloted, reacted quickly, tried new things during the pandemic. CIOs reported that they piloted 7 times the projects in 2020 versus 2019. So a lot of quick thinking and innovation happening there. We want to go to the next slide. And perhaps sometimes being good at something doesn't always pay in the end. 48% of our CIOs said they expected to keep the new responsibilities for the long term. Some of these things they took on, they're going to keep. Some of those you might be more interested in keeping than others. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to stop at this point and talk to our panelists and hear some reaction from them. So I'd love to just hear from the two of you what new formal or informal roles you took on during the pandemic. And then with that, what do you want to keep? And maybe more importantly, what do you no longer want to be involved in? So Shannon, you want to get us started? And then we can
Sure, I'm happy to get us started, and good morning, everyone. So the roles, I think that the formal role that we got to take on, and Jenny just kind of mentioned this, is that of PPE. So we supported the health authority in Oregon to procure massive amounts of PPE, testing materials and whatnot. And by de facto, again, Jenny, to your point, the CAO's role had already the infrastructure built in to take on not just the procurement of that, but also the warehousing, receiving, shipping, and distribution. So that was not something we had a choice in the matter, and actually kind of stuck the landing on it. And certainly the health authority was grateful for that. So that's kind of a formal role that we took on. And then as we evolved through this COVID journey we've all been on and can't seem to get off, the evolution of the workforce, and we saw this in the polls as well, that the human capital component and the effects on the workforce are quite dramatic and enduring. And so again, the CIO's role in Oregon kind of took on that piece of really engaging the enterprise in that conversation of, hey, this is a brand new world. What do we want the state of Oregon's workforce and culture to look like going forward, and convening that conversation across the enterprise. So that's a little bit about what's our roles in Oregon anyway. And I don't want to hog the conversation. I'll turn it over to Alex so he can talk about Georgia.
Well, I'm happy to, Shannon. It's good to be with you and good to be with everyone across the nation. I think, like a lot of states, we did not know the effects of COVID early on. We're fortunate; we have 5 operating divisions to include purchasing as well as human resources administration and others. And we went virtual literally overnight, and we were fortunate to have already had a few teams, such as our fleet management group and our surplus property group and our contact center, that had already gone virtual a few years ago. So it was kind of served as a blueprint for us to move in. All of our divisions set up specific websites to collect relevant, timely, and changing information about operations and adjustments. As part of the pandemic, it was a moving ball. I think all of us had probably the same experiences. Our human resource administration division provided guidance through the statewide HR community regarding leave and benefits and other HR guidance. This division also helped our agencies throughout the enterprise, if you will, interpret and implement the guidance with such things as the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act and the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And we established websites which offered agencies updated information about the CDC and the public health guidelines, as well as our state purchasing division, as all of you were doing, I'm sure, working 24/7 literally to support our emergency management, our agency, and our public health agencies in finding PPE and ventilators and other medical equipment, while also vetting suppliers in the new virtual environment. I know our team pushed some new innovation for us, such as our telehealth tools that we put out there. We work with suppliers to start producing more critical supplies, and launched a new workshop series to help prepare our small businesses to compete and to service our state needs. Literally, we had to work with our public health officials with our Georgia World Congress Center here in Atlanta to support 2 separate rounds of creating emergency overflow medical space that would alleviate our critical care bed shortages during the pandemic. And our state purchasing also retooled all of their training offerings for virtual, including our small business symposium. And what we found is that we're actually going to be keeping a lot of that because we found more participation in our virtual training, for example, than we did when we were doing it live. We were also able to complete several IT projects that kind of followed what the survey revealed, that allowed our customer agencies to access more of their data in real time for things like fleet management usage, our insurance claim adjusting that we control. And both of these projects supported revised policies and our enterprise goals of efficiently using our resources and reducing waste and fraud and harm. And but during the process, though, as far as what roles do we hope to keep, it became pretty evident for us, and I would assume many of it, that telework, I think, is here to stay. A lot of our research is showing that. We monitored our employees' feelings as well as their production. We did many surveys. We put our measurement folks in place to see how we're doing. And we reduced office space. We used flexible hoteling workspaces, promoting safety, promoting cleanliness, and that sort of thing. And as a result, one thing we're absolutely keeping is our floor consolidation has been quite a success for us. Plus, we're saving about $268,000 every year. So, and our productivity went up. So that's one of the things that we'll be doing. So I don't want to hog the mic anymore either, but I'm just kind of tickled to be with everybody.
Well, we really appreciate your insights. It seems like, a lot of things were shared across states, a lot of pain points were felt, but everyone kind of approached them a little differently.
I think so.
We'd love to hear from the audience. So for those of you on the phone, if you guys want to come off mute and share some of the things that you took on that you want to keep, your experience with innovation, you can also put those in the chat. Anyone else want to share?
So to Alex's point, Oregon is exactly in the same boat around remote work. We too did an extensive employee outreach and got just tremendous response. We heard from our folks that 87% of us who are working remotely, which is roughly 80% of the state's workforce of 45,000, 87% of those folks wanted to stay remote. And so that's really driving the reimagination of our workplace and the eventual restack of our entire real estate portfolio.
I think we'll be seeing these and feeling these changes for some time here. Anyone? It looks like we have one in Missouri, migrating to virtual trainings, which seems to be working really well. Very glad to hear that. I think we're all improving our virtual interactions and how we do those trainings. Anyone else want to unmute and tell us we'll have a couple more other spots where you can jump in, but anyone else taking on new roles? All right, well, we'll move on here, but there'll be other opportunities to jump in. So we really do want to hear you guys' thoughts as we work through this.
Thank you. So it sounds like both Oregon and Georgia were at the core of leading innovation. So now if we go to the next slide, thank you. And this is just a tool that will be in the deck. If you want to walk through with your teams, the really complex decision making on what do we want to keep, what do we not want to keep, what do we like taking on, what are our fears and hopes. That was something interesting that came out of the research, was the decision making process on what's going to evolve in the chief administrator's office. So this tool is in the deck that you guys can have and you can share with your teams. So if we go to the next slide, what we're now going to talk about is we were at the core of innovation. What does innovation look like in the future? Where do we need to step back, or where are we going to accelerate? So very similar to the survey results, human capital is going to remain the focus of innovation. When we asked chief administrators across the country where they thought future innovation was going to be, human capital, remote work, we heard Shannon and Alex both talk about that, were far leading. I thought it was really interesting that IT was also second when you guys were answered the survey that came back where it's going to be in the future, as well as real estate and some elevated digital delivery. So if we go to the next slide, talking about what you guys wrote on that elevated digital delivery, we also found that chief administrators and their peers really elevated their use of real-time dashboards and data-driven decisions during COVID. So 72% of chief administrators around the country. We'll go to the next one. Thank you. So what caused the innovation and what's going to remain causing the innovation is the section we're talking about now. Of course, a need for a fast response and a common goal for what answered in the moment of what led to innovation over the last 18 months, as well as rule flexibility and the increased citizen demand. So we're doing more and more research on the expectations of citizens and customer experience. And this citizen demand, I think, will continue to be even more important, as the need for the fast response and common goal aren't going to be as strong in the future. So that's been some of the innovation drivers. If we go to the next one, what was also really interesting was that chief administrators and their peers around the country were willing to take on a little bit more risk. So because of COVID, their appetite for risk has increased. On average, nearly about 60% of chief administrators answered that. And then the next one. Oh, let's go back. Yep, there we go. So there we go. So what's going to need to unlock future innovation for the future? Almost all chief administrators felt that these changes were not temporary. We heard both Alex and Shannon answer that from their experience in Georgia and Oregon. But what do they need? What does your team's needs to continue this innovation? Leadership support was by far the clearest winner. So that's going to be my very first question to Alex and Shannon, but I want to hear your guys' appetite for leadership, as well as some continued funding. I also think this one is really interesting, that about half said a change in the state operating model. So I think that would be really interesting to dig into, as well as legislative support. So I think we have one more before we pause. Yep, if you'll go to the next one. There we go. What was also interesting, that when we did this survey, the importance of the investment. So many chief administrators do anticipate a budget shift going into the future, either short-term or mid-term budget shifts going into the future. And so if we'll go to the question slide, we're going to pause here. So this section was really talking about what drove the innovation, need for a fast response, common rule flexibility. But now let's talk about in the future where we're going to continue those innovations. So I'm going to ask Georgia and Oregon to come back on the line with me. And let's start with Alex, since we started with Shannon last time. So Alex, what's going to continue to enable your team to innovate? And then we'll go to Shannon.
Well, I've thought about this a lot, as we've all had. I hate to say anything good came out of COVID, because it's been horrible and we all know it. We're still living with it. But it has, I loved your survey, because it has, I think, freed up administrators to be a little bit more creative. The thing that's driving us in Georgia is talent for the future. We all have to compete for it. I know Shannon and I were talking about it before. And, you know, we looked long before COVID actually hit. We were looking at the millennials and Generation Z, and we saw they're not staying with the same agency or long, and they tend to leave the state's workforce. And so we see the cost of training them. We see the challenges of our teams when they leave, the higher turnover rate in these groups, and they consistently ask for more flexibility, which work-life balance, which I don't think is a bad thing. And so we made big changes in our job posting via our Team Georgia Careers, try to make it more modern looking, easier to navigate, help to reduce some of the steps and time to connect with the candidates, because they do not wait long to hear from us before they move on. And we're all competing. We drove down our agency's turnover rate by a significant margin, and I can't stress enough how important, and this is one of the, I think, the real challenges with our innovation that I think is going to be there, our telework and such, but is leadership. I think communication is critical. We had to figure out innovative ways to communicate both horizontally and vertically. But I think it's very, very critical, and we're still working on that, and how we keep the camaraderie up while still giving them the flexibility, I think is going to be an innovation driver. It is something that keeps me up at night, but I do see the temperature for leadership now being more receptive to the idea not only telework, but intelligent automation. We have about, I'm pulling this out of the weeds, probably about 12,000 less employees than we had back around 2008, 2010. And so we've had across Georgia trying to use intelligent automation where we can to improve the biggest bang for the buck for the taxpayers. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's a few things off the top of my head.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Shannon, what about you? What's going to drive innovation, or what's the temperature of leadership around the support for continued innovation?
Yeah, thank you. So much like Alex and Georgia, the evolution of the workforce is enormous, right? So Oregon's embracing a almost fully remote environment wherever possible. Of course, that's not possible everywhere, but about 80% will be either remote or hybrid. And so we've also turned to, again, to Alex's point about, talent's tough to get. So we recruit nationally now and fully support out-of-state remote work, which is a quasi Herculean lift to figure out at the front side. But we are slogging our way through that and excited with the results that we've gotten so far. So we're just at the precipice of that particular journey, but we're very excited about that. I think the two other drivers for Oregon, in particular, kind of to parlay off that previous point, is just the sea change in state operations that were brought about by COVID. So I know that's a huge generality, but there are so many components to that. I think our challenge here is how do we aggregate all of the work streams and changes in work streams that fell out of our forced virtual environment, and how do we really amalgamate those into a new overall model for us, right? So there's a lot of work to be done there and a lot of exploration, and we look forward to employing some data to help inform that kind of new macro model, and not just agency by agency. And the third thing for Oregon in particular is so climate challenges and adaptations are a big deal, certainly in Oregon and a lot of the Western states. Well, nationally, it just means fires for us here. So the threat of wildfires has been quite frankly terrifying over the last 2 summers, and has really impacted operations and planning and strategy, and trying to position ourselves to be resilient from national disasters, or natural disasters rather, as well as the obviously public health threats as well. So trying to roll that into a great big tidy bundle, encased in matters around social justice and DEI. So lots of work to be done, but those are all, I would think those are the high points of what really drive us to think about what's next.
Yeah, thank you on enabling innovations. And then did you talk about the temperature of leadership support?
I did not. My bad. Sorry.
No,
so our leadership has been a champion of figuring out, how do we do things differently? How do we be better? How do we turn this catastrophe into an opportunity for us? So I know that my COO has said from day one, push the envelope. This is a moment. This is a moment that's not going to happen again in state government. This is an opportunity to, 180, if you will, a lot of our legacy practices, policies, procedures, so on and so forth. So we've had nothing but just tremendous support from our leadership. So we've been super lucky that way.
Well, and that's what the survey kind of said, needing that leadership support. And I think, Alex, you already talked about the leadership support in Georgia. Anything there to add on the need for it to drive your team's innovation?
Well, it freed us up, I think, to, they say enthusiasm's a force multiplier. Well, courage is too. And, I'm not probably the youngest person in this group. And I've had to rethink a lot of how I grew up with, coming to work and all the things that we did. And I think a lot of my peers probably felt the same way. But I was personally, hate to make it about me, but I was very lucky. I had a deputy commissioner who brought this to my attention when I came in, and I looked at what I spent a lot of time with the Marine Corps as an intelligence officer. And one of the things we try to teach a commander, and the hardest thing in the world to teach a commander, is what we call ground truth. And, when a plan goes in place and they're hesitant to change the plan, but you got to tell them the battlefield's changed and I'm giving you ground truth. And so we had to deal with what I call ground truth. And I think it freed us up to take chances a little bit. And I've had very, very good support from across the leadership team. Our capital literally is across the street from it. And they've been very supportive and helping us to try to find new ways of doing business in a smarter and more cost-effective way, and one that's good for the employees. So I think the temperature has been very good. I'm hoping that it will continue. I've seen several of my colleagues that run other agencies that are being much more open to doing creative things. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I love about the NASCA research is that this can give you something to lean on. So if you put this up and say, well, here's where my peers are, here's where my benchmark states are. So if you're on this call and maybe you don't have the support or the funding or haven't been the driver of innovation, we saw that on the survey, you could take this NASCA survey and say my national association is saying that leading states are doing X. So also I think that's one of the great things about this survey is to know what's the temperature across the country. I also, a couple times we've done this survey, have seen teams take these slides, put them up and actually sticky note this with their own team saying, here's where everyone is across the country, where are we falling behind? Or Shannon talked to a new operating model. Are we doing a new operating model? So that's also a way to use this type of research. So before we go to the next section, I want to see anyone on the call. What's continuing to drive your innovation on your team? I know we have lots of people all over from, I saw Wyoming and California and Missouri. Anyone, anything driving innovation right now or places where you're pausing? I see some old friends, Louisiana, Marcia, and
feel free to either come off mute or just drop some comments in the chat. Either one's fine, but we know you've all been dealing with this too, so would love to hear your perspective.
And then if I think Tammy, if you'll actually go to the next slide, this might be a way to think about it. Again, what we did was we created some tools that when you're trying to think of factors to consider on some of these innovations, how effective was something, how efficient was it feasible? So maybe, is there ways that your team is thinking about innovation and which ones are permanent or which ones are not permanent? Any factors your teams are considering that other states should also be considering?
Hi, this is Anna Lassa from California. I'll go
Yeah.
ahead and share. Hi, everyone. Well, Department of General Services, which I'm over, is within the Agency of Government Operations. And so government operations for the state of California is like the backbone support, admin support, has HR department, it has the Department of Technology. And so we're really leaning into transforming government and going on a listening tour. Our agency secretary is going on a listening tour of all the other agencies within state government. And so because we are control and customer service departments within GovOps, we both provide backbone business support to our agencies and also have an external facing portal for those who want to do business with California. So a way that we're transforming government right now is really leaning in, listening to how effective we are, our rates, how timely we are, we're now recruiting from across the state. I'm based out of Southern California and I go up to Sacramento. So a lot of it is around workforce agility. It's around providing the service within an appropriate schedule and rates that I think state government or other groups are agreeable to. For our external facing component, we're doing more outreach, more engagement, and we're offering folks different forms of engaging with government, whether it's in person or virtually. So we're looking, just for example, public meetings, hearings, we're starting to offer 2 paths. For those who want to continue doing virtual, I think it's a great thing and we don't want to do without it, but there are some people who want to go back in person, and we'll have tiered systems. We're exploring that. What would be the tiered billing rates if you want to have an in-person hearing versus a virtual hearing? So those are just some of the innovations. There are so many, but giving folks options, I think is super important.
Well, and thank you so much. Those citizen expectations and an elevated kind of giving that tiered options is really interesting. So I appreciate you sharing the California story we were sharing in our speaker prep call. That's what we love about NASCA's. You get to hear all these different things happening around the states. So before we go to the last section, any other states kind of enduring innovation examples? I'm also a professor, and I know you do the long pause, so that's my long pause. But based on the research, here was our recommendations, is to expect the role of the chief administrator to be expanded as a driver of innovation. We saw in the pre-survey that several of the states aren't quite there. Their office isn't driving innovation, but we do expect this role to be expanded really as a driver is innovation. The chief administrators showed that they were operational leaders during COVID, and that really shined, and that will only continue to be increased. Keep human capital a major focus of future innovations. We heard that story both from Oregon and from Georgia. Incorporate more dashboards and data to drive decisions. That was elevated during COVID. As well as focusing, this isn't something we went into as much today, but is highlighted a lot more in the research, and I dropped the research that's on the NASCA page, but eliminating paper-based processes, and then continue to gain leadership support and budget support as a critical driver to sustain these innovations. And there's also that tool in there that I just showed you that you can walk through with your teams where you want to endure innovations and maybe the complex decisions that go to, we moved really fast over the last 18 months. Where do we need to pause and reverse or reconsider? So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jenny, where we dive into workforce.
Yeah, and I just wanted to pause. I realized we didn't say this at the onset, but if you follow that link, you'll see this research is in 3 slide shares. So we wanted it to be something that you could digest quickly. We know everyone is and has been stretched to the max. So it's in 3 slide shares. We didn't add a lot of text. It's a quick digestible read. And like Jamie said, something that you can use to kind of show the work that the CAOs go, the benchmark with other states, and that kind of thing. So just wanted to let you know that's kind of how it's formatted. So one of our slide shares focuses on remote work. And we're going to shift the conversation and talk about workforce a little bit, because as we mentioned, a huge focus of innovation. We've heard from all the states that they're still figuring out how to deal with this. And we know that, government went remote very quickly, and it was something very new for government. So we want to go to the next slide. So we asked CAOs, did you have a telework or remote policy in place before the pandemic? And everyone we surveyed said, yep, we had, yep, sure did. But 72% of the CAOs said they made changes to the existing policy to allow for more flexibility. And these changes varied from everything from expanding the policy to allow more people to work remote, allowing state equipment at home. I know I had a friend who worked for the state and took home their chair and they didn't have laptops, so I had to take all that home. And appropriate that I was going to talk about remote work, my dog barks. And then some states had to really deal with changing union classifications and arrangements. So we've heard from many of you that you made a change quickly and you need to kind of step back and reevaluate for the world moving forward. If you want to go to the next slide, let's see, whoops. Oh yeah, okay, sorry. So we know that the techniques to manage workforce, we all kind of were learning about this environment where there were far more people remote. And our CAOs said they did things such as informal daily check-ins. They tried to shift their focus to project-based productivity measures, not focusing on hours at the computer, but rather on outcomes. And we also heard a little bit about that formal employee satisfaction survey that Georgia mentioned they had done. So we saw a lot of that too, just trying to gauge where they were and where also employees wanted to go moving forward. If we go to the next slide. So in both the private and the public sector, when we talk to people about workforce, they mentioned that they're worried about culture and how you maintain that culture when part of your workforce is remote, when your whole workforce is remote, when people are in and out of the office. 50% of the CAOs we talked to, and again, this was kind of at the end of 2020, so maybe this might have increased by now, but they said they anticipated a shift in the organization's culture, connectivity, and morale due to remote work. And figuring out how to manage this is going to be a challenge over, the next several months as we adapt to a new normal. Can you go to the next slide? Another issue, and so I should say our third slide here focuses a little bit more on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we found is that many of you felt that there was some perceived inequity in who could work remotely during the COVID. Another issue we'll have to consider, we know some functions, remote work might not work. If you're supposed to be talking to a citizen, your residents of your states every day, might not work to be remote, but balancing that and kind of thinking about that perceived inequity is super important to moving forward. So we're going to stop here if we go to the next slide and hear from our panel again. So we'd love to hear from both George, Alex and Shannon on what's making the biggest impact on your workplace culture right now, and how has the perception of customer and citizen experiences changed with remote work? So Alex, you want to start this one off?
Well, I guess I can. I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about. I think we've been Georgia is most people don't realize this. I can only speak from my own experiences and no one else's, but we're almost like two states. It's the largest land-wise. It's the largest state east of the Mississippi River, and although we have a wonderful labor force in Georgia, we're particularly strong in our transportation and our material moving, as well as our computer and mathematical occupations and that sort of thing. We're the home of about 52,000 software developers and programmers. We have over 21,000 computer and information analysts, and we're doing well, especially with our colleges and our universities and what we're bringing in and training. But agriculture is also our #1 export in Georgia, and we have a very rural area to Atlanta, big metropolitan city and a great city. Love Atlanta. Been here since I was a boy, but it has all of the challenges of a big city, and a lot of folks recruiting, since Georgia is so very large. It's tough to get to those areas that could really that we could benefit from. So we've been able to recruit outside of the immediate Atlanta area and secure talent, which we probably they would have overlooked us, or we would have overlooked them because of simply where they live in very rural areas. I know inside DOAS, since we instituted telework, hired a lady who just simply outstanding credentials in state purchasing. We could not have she couldn't move, but we got her to come in here, as well as a lot of other folks to come in here. I had one lady in risk management that actually took a pay decrease because we offered telework. And so I don't want this to be all about telework, but I'm also excited about what we're able to do with our recruiting efforts. And I think the biggest impact on our workplace culture right now is trying to be able to recruit. And but what I've also seen, and we are still in the We made great advances, but we're in the studying phase. I'm a big believer in data. I want to see I trust, but I like to verify. So I want to continue to monitor, especially not only our employee satisfaction, but also our customer satisfaction. And we've done that. And with some of the improvements that we've made, customers are able to get to the information they need much, much quicker. And we're seeing an increase in their view of how Georgia state government is satisfying them. So we're really kind of opening up state government, if you will, to more folks in Georgia, and I'm very very happy with what I'm seeing in that regard.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's exactly it. And again, I echo Alex's comments around kind of that opening up of state government and making it more accessible to a greater talent pool, both within and outside of Oregon, but also making it more accessible to folks that wouldn't necessarily have a direct conduit, if you will, to state government. And some of our digital transformation has really helped that, particularly on the service delivery or citizen delivery side. DMV somehow managed to make it less painful to go to DMV, and there's been tremendous feedback from positive feedback from that. And it's just making government, I think, this opportunity for it's kind of a cross section between the opportunity to work remotely, right? So we can hire someone in the rural parts of Oregon, and the backside, the long-term goal of something, like having workers all over the state, is an opportunity for economic development in those rural areas. So it's an opportunity for us to restack our portfolio, real estate portfolio, and maybe we partner with small towns to understand what their goals and comp plans are and invest in that while we make drop-in space, right, to support our remote workforce. So in that way, we're bringing government's wealth to those who need it the most, right? So we are excited about that. I know that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback from citizens and municipalities just around this very notion. But I would be remiss in saying if there is a segment of the population around the service delivery piece that has not benefited from our digital transformation, and that is the underserved communities. We've just been thereby presented another barrier, right? The technology barrier. So that is long range DEI work that needs to happen. But I firmly believe that there are parallel paths to getting us to that next place where government is not only an employer of choice, but also, very relevant and accessible and fair to all citizens, and not just those in the metro area.
If I could jump back in here too, one thing I forgot to mention is, I do believe government services is an honorable profession, and we're trying to impart that to our employees, our leadership academy, and things like that we do. If it's done right, it is. And but one side benefit, in fact, I was thinking about it this morning. I live in North Atlanta, and we suffer all of the highway problems that any major city will suffer, but it's better environmentally. I'm seeing that. We don't have near the cars that we had before the pandemic, as well as the other benefits that Shannon and I spoke of. So I see that as a benefit also. You can actually drive through the middle of Atlanta. Come visit us. You can actually do it now. I haven't been able to do that for many years, so it's kind of nice.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a double-edged sword, as you guys were kind of saying. Some folks really want that digital experience, and I know I don't ever want to pick up a phone and call someone. I want to be able to just do it, but I also will get the call from my father who says, Jenny, I don't know how to do this online. So, thinking of serving both populations is certainly a challenge. It creates opportunity for some and others less so. I'd love to hear from some of the other states, how you guys are approaching remote work, how you're thinking about customer and citizen satisfaction. I know many states are just now, you know, or the state of Ohio where I live, they've been thinking about going back to work and pausing it because of the resurgence of the Delta variant. How are other states tackling this? Anyone want to volunteer? All right, well, I guess. And Shannon, I know when we were prepping for this, you mentioned that Oregon had done an extensive amount of research around remote work, and you might have some tools that could share. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned with the core team when we were prepping that, back to the remote work, and I mentioned earlier, like this is the moment where we can pivot forward and become a very contemporary, relevant employer of choice. And so the last 8 months of my life has been pretty much devoted to that effort, and it's been extensive work, both research with our own employees enterprise-wide, so the 45,000 of them, and as well as really a deep introspective look at the culture of the Oregon workforce and where do we want to pivot that to. So I've been convening a conversation with all state agencies around how do we do that and what tools do we need to get there. And so the output of that is a novella. If you're interested, I can share that link with you. It's called Oregon Work Reimagined, and it addresses really every aspect of turning our workforce from an on-site workforce to a remote national workforce. And we are still in the implementation process of that. We've got, I mentioned the Herculean lift of figuring out our employees in all the states. That we've got employees in 43 states at this point. So, figuring out the technical pieces, but also really bringing along that shift in the management paradigm, right? Management by outcomes. And for that's easier for some managers than others. And I'm sure you can sympathize with that. So really supporting those folks to be the best leaders that they can for our employees, and then also takes in considerations those other bits, the longer term pieces of reinvesting our wealth in a rural place to support our employees and support local economic development. So it's pretty far reaching. Like I said, it's 58 pages. So if you need to something to whittle away the time or something to go to sleep at night with, I'm happy to share that link. We're still rolling it out, but we are super proud of the work that we have done, and we are excited for the possibilities that it holds for us and for anyone who wants to use it.
Yeah, that's awesome. We appreciate that. I think Jamie dropped that in the chat, and it's always just helpful to see how others are approaching it. So that's really great. I'm just going to give one more call out, see if anyone else has anything they'd like to add of how their states are approaching questions for our panelists, and then we're getting to the end here. So, all right, well, we can go on to the next slide. Again, we put another tool in here if you guys want to use this for discussion on your own teams. We'll share these slides. And then just kind of looking forward, just wanted to touch on a lot of areas that we've discussed here. So we know that the workplace post-COVID is going to look different. A few areas that we think that states should consider as they approach this, and some of them that we heard about from our panelists, was the impact on customers, a shift in expectation for the workers. For example, what happens on snow days when people are working remote? Do they work? Do they stay at home with their kids? What does that look like? A changing work location. So Shannon mentioned they have folks working for Oregon all over the state. What does this mean for tax implications? How can it impact workers' compensations? What does it mean for the Bureau of Worker Comp claim? And then it may also impact paid leave. We talked about equity and inclusion, particularly in relation to the internet, but more broadly and like that cultural difference as well. And then finally, an ongoing need to refine performance management and shift the focus to goals and outcomes versus hours worked, which, as we've discussed, is much easier said than done. So I think that's all we had planned for the presentation. I just want to pause a minute, give everyone else one last chance for questions, and then we can wrap up.
And I think we just want to say thank you so much. It's been so much fun working with all the states on this project and learning from you. And what we've seen people use this with is really to lean into the National Association, to lean into NASCA, to say, you know, here's where our states are leading, or here's where our states, we may not be as far as some of our peer states. And all of that research is on the NASCA website that you can also share with your teams as well and do this workshop internally.
All right, and a huge thank you to Shannon and Alex for joining us and sharing their perspective. And Pam, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jenny, and to Jamie as well. Thank you, Alex and Shannon, for bringing the state perspective. As you heard Jamie mention, this is on NASCA's learning management system, our knowledge center. So feel free to go there. You'll find all 3 slide shares. It's a great opportunity to take to your team, to have a conversation, to really look at what your colleagues are doing from around the country. And we're just so appreciative to Accenture, their entire team, for all the work that they've put in with NASCA. To produce this survey, to produce the slide shares, and also to be with us today for this national webinar. We're excited to continue to work with Accenture going into this current fiscal year as well, and new exciting things on the horizon with the team. So thank you so much for joining us today. Again, check out NASCA's Knowledge Center at nasca.org. Check us out on our social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And also, we hope to see many of you at our Institute on Management and Leadership coming up next month in Rochester, New York. We will talk to you soon. Thanks so much for joining us today for NASCA's National Webinar Series.